I'm going to give quick introductions to them because you have longer bios online, and we want to get into the discussion. But we have Jeff Nicholas. Jeff?
Hey, I'm Jeff Nicholas. I oversee...
Jeff is Director of VR Creative and Production at Live Nation Studios. Tana Frederick, who is producer and actor on Defrost, which is a VR series. We have Peter Oberdorfer, President of Tactic. We have Michael Connolly, founder of Blackthorn Media. Michael Yang, Managing Director of Comcast Ventures. Ewan McDonald, CEO of Holler. And got everyone? Yep. Okay. So before we go into our discussion, we also want to get a sense of who you are. So how many of you are currently producing VR projects? Almost all of you. Okay. AR. Okay, a couple of you. How many are on the technology side, developing software or cameras or other technology for VR and AR? A few. Okay. Okay, so why don't we start on the end with Jeff, and I'm going to ask each of you just to take a couple of minutes and give an idea of what your business is about and what areas of VR and or AR you're working on at the moment.
Cool, yeah. So I oversee all VR, and really all immersive at Live Nation. So Live Nation is the largest concert promoter in the world. We promote or produce 25,000 shows a year. We have 80 festivals. We manage about 600 artists. And on my side, as part of the Live Nation content team, we're creating VR and immersive experiences that help amplify that artist connection, the artist and fan connection. So two of our first programs, one is with Next VR, and that's centered around live stream. We've done about 5 shows so far. We've got another slew scheduled for this year, and across 5 years, we'll do hundreds of shows with them. And we have an original content series with Hulu that's focused on the creative process of artists and the storytelling around that. Our first 2 artists were Lil Wayne and Major Lazer, which came out, the Major Lazer episode came out earlier last week.
I'm Tana Frederick, and I produced and also acted in Defrost, which is a narrative VR experience. It's 12 episodes, around 5 to 6 minutes, which we shot a while ago and are completing it right now.
And the first 4 episodes, I think you said, are released?
This first 6 episodes we just released at Cannes on Friday. Yeah.
I'm Peter Oberdorfer. I head a group called Tactic in San Francisco. We work primarily for agencies and brands, creating AR, VR, immersive, and real-time experiences. We have a variety of clientele. Some are direct to brands. We work with Apple, Amazon, and then full-service agencies, Deutsch and McCann and others. But we create both mobile and tethered headset experiences.
My name is Michael Connolly. I'm the founder of Blackthorn Media. We started in VR about 3.5 years ago. The goal of the company is long-form narrative in VR. In the shorter term, though, we're looking at the arcade environment as a bridge to get to the goal of, well, essentially to buy time for the long-form audience to grow in a format that's perhaps a bit less expensive than the cost of entry today. Everything we do is 6 degrees of freedom. The reason for being of the company is really to try and build out the best possible experience that VR can afford. Anyway, yeah, work in progress, all about storytelling.
Now, the VR arcade, we're seeing a lot in China, but what sort of interest are you seeing in the U.S., or are you going after foreign markets?
Oh, sure, yeah. We have some really interesting discussions going on right now about different perspective venues all over the world, including, we've got some interesting things that we think will be landing in the United States later this year, which I can't talk about too much right now, but hopefully within a few weeks. Anyway, yeah, we're looking at both the sort of themed entertainment, the larger space, let's say like Void, and then we're also looking at individual pods, think something, in the realm of what the Awesome Rocket Ship guys are doing. But we're very, we're very platform agnostic. So we're building for, everything from just, somebody seated in a chair to somebody who's got a 10 by 10 room to work with, to people who have motion bases that want to use our work, to people that want to build entire, we like to entertain the notion of teams of people playing together or against each other in an arcade type format as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Michael.
Hi, Michael Yang with Comcast Ventures. I think I'm the only VC on the panel today, but I co-lead our venture investing efforts in the VR AR landscape. And we've been fortunate enough to back 7 different startups in the space. Some of them are AltSpace VR in the social collaboration communication space, Baobab Studios, which is a content creator in animation, Felix and Paul Studios out of Montreal, which do cinematic virtual reality, Kite and Lighting, game studio here in town, Meta, which is our one AR investment, NextVR, which was mentioned earlier, and then Spaces, who are also based here in LA, and they primarily also work in the location-based VR space.
And Ewan?
Hi, Ewan McDonald, CEO of Holler Media. Holler Media is a kind of full spectrum technology company. We've developed or co-developed a 360 capture system with the view to creating original content using 360 cameras. We partnered with a company called Ion 360, which just launched the first camera, the Ion 360U, at the Billboard Music Awards last weekend, which is essentially it converts your mobile device into like a 360 camera with an attachment, and that will stream live as well as capturing 360 content directly onto your device. Holler's main focus is producing original 360 interactive content, and we're essentially developing tools that allow you to enhance any 360 content such that it can be interacted with on the Holler platform, which will be coming out hopefully later on this year.
So we'll talk about a few different areas, and actually let's start with live content. What sort of content are you finding to get the most traction at this point? And is this mostly people viewing from different platforms that are available online, or are you seeing people going to public venues to view it? Oh, sorry. We were talking about the location. About live, and I was asking if he could talk about what sort of live content seems to be getting the most interest right now, music or sports or the like, and also are people mostly viewing it from platforms online, or are they going to public places to view it?
Me?
Yes.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is obviously actually being able to broadcast live 360 or any VR content. Obviously, there's NextVR, which has kind of got the most traction, but then it's a case of having a platform to view it on. So Facebook 360 Live only just started, and YouTube Live is also now available. But the challenges with any 360 content, and even more so with NextVR, given that they're trying to create stereoscopic 360 content, is obviously just the equipment to actually broadcast it, and then ultimately who you're broadcasting to in terms of an audience. I think the Live Nation guy may have a better perspective on this. I mean, we've done live recordings of which, again, both at events, and one of the things which we did recently, which was behind the scenes for Transformers 5, is again that you do get some unique perspectives with a 360 experience. So not necessarily where we're broadcasting live, but the potential in the future to have behind the scenes experiences from a movie set is definitely something which we think is going to be compelling.
Do you want to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at Live Nation, obviously, live is our game, and all of the live streaming that we're doing in VR or 360 is really centered around live, as we call it, rather than VOD. So it's about an ephemeral stream that you can tune into right as it's happening, watch and be a part of that experience, and if you miss it, right? So the NextVR piece, the NextVR series that we're doing, we're getting tremendously positive results from that. We've streamed, like I said, 5 shows at this point. That is a program that's been in development for about a year with them. Everything we do at Live Nation is all about scale. So we wanted to make sure to the point previously about it being difficult to live stream 360, That's absolutely true. There's not too many people in the game that can do it at a super high level. You see lots of 360 streams, but you don't see a lot of stereoscopic, full-scale, high bitrate streams. So that was the reason we selected NextVR as the first partner for our program. And it's interesting because we do see over the long tail, there's a business proposition there with regards to whether it's VR tickets or that sort of thing. But in the short term and midterm, we're really focused on bridging the gap between artist and fan and providing people who aren't at the show a different level of experience. I don't think the live VR experience will ever, eclipse what it's like to be there at a show. You can't get a drink, you can't interact with people in real life, you can't, touch and feel everything that is live music. But what it does do is offer a completely different experience that it can be transformative. We're seeing people spending, upwards of half an hour or more in a headset watching a live performance, and that's an incredible number when you think about media in general. So we're really bullish on where it goes. I think I'm interested to see too what happens outside of music. We know sports is reacting really well for the NextVR guys, but there's a lot of event stuff where we just can't get there physically. That'd be great to go to in VR.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I can add, obviously, since we're investors in NextVR, we have some perspectives on how it's going for them. They started mostly in sports, and I think thanks to you guys, you've pulled them into music, and those were the twin theses that they had on what were live events that would garner interest in the sector and also potentially substantiate monetization, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Their big relationship at NextVR is with the NBA. They went directly to the league. The league incorporated a weekly game in live VR into the league pass, which was a subscription consumer pay model, over $100 that people who are ardent fans wanted to kind of sign up for. And obviously NextVR receives a portion of that. To your point, I'm not going to reveal the actual numbers, but people are spending well over 30 minutes, that was the number you used, well over that in VR, mobile VR typically, because they've optimized for Gear VR for reach and accessibility, watching the NBA games. And I think the other thing that's interesting is it needs to be a superior broadcast to television. Otherwise, why would you ever leave your big screen, which in sports, they've spent decades kind of making that a pretty good experience for folks. So over time, what you've seen, what NextVR has done on the production side is they've added commentators, they've added statistics, they've added highlights, they've done other stuff to bring it to parity and then potentially beyond a traditional sports broadcast. And that's kind of self-evident when you look back and think about it, like where would you go with it? And now today, they are breaking talent and creating talent for commenting and moderating in that format, right? And again, because of the perspectives of the camera and the views and all that, those are things you can't get on broadcast TV, nor can you get if you only buy one ticket in the stadium. So, that's where, live VR needs to kind of go to continue to stay ahead of, the traditional model.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the transformers behind the scenes, but brand building and marketing is definitely an area where we're starting to see work already. And Peter, since you're already working with a number of ad agencies in this area, do you want to talk about what they're asking for, what you're finding, and what you're working on?
Well, I think we're kind of in a transition period where a lot of agencies, rather than getting social media impressions, are thinking they want to dip their toe in the pool of either VR or AR. And candidly, a lot of them don't really differentiate between the two. It's a little buzzworthy at this point. So we get involved with their creative teams and help them provide solutions in that area and advise them on ways to scale that and reduce barriers of entry. Whereas some of the things are activations using tethered headsets, that are for a specific event and kind of command all the sort of features that come with that. We a lot of the time say, why don't you do something for mobile, so that you can get a wider audience and not just something at that particular event and scale it a bit. In keeping with like the streaming events and things like that. But I think for us, we're designing specific experiences that are repeatable They're not live. So, you know, I come from the world of visual effects, so it's a lot of world building and things like that. I think that there is an opportunity right now for brands to be sort of patrons in this sense and to gain exposure just through the interest in the medium. But I think that's quickly going to transition into social spaces. I think, you know, Facebook and just, I think this week, Steam announced a social space for VR where I think you're going to start seeing brands, I don't want to say invade, but be part of that space so that you can get groups of people and targeted groups of people and interests in social VR spaces rather than these sort of bespoke singular apps that I don't think are quite as scalable in the long run.
It's interesting. I've been on doing panels here at Digital Hollywood for the last 3 years and on a lot of panels over the last 4 or 5. And where we started at the beginning of that curve to where we are now is radically different in the VR space. And this year has felt a lot like the money dried up. But the reality is it didn't. And I've talked about this before, it consolidated. And so last year, we were seeing a lot of just terrible content and like spaghetti being thrown at the wall, of people just feeling like they needed to get in, brands feeling like they needed to get in and just making stuff. And that overly saturated in a negative way. Now this consolidation feels like it's happening on the financial side and the money's going a lot deeper and it's a lot smarter and you're seeing really high quality experiences, whether they be interactive with 6 Degrees of Freedom or whether they be 360 video. And that's, I think we have to accelerate that. We talked about this previously. I think we have to, as an industry, accelerate the creation of high quality content. The days of testing cameras on the job are over. This is a fully formed industry now. It's still at the beginning, but consumers need great content. And brands can participate in that in a really, really strong way if they get behind sort of the right types of content.
Right.
Yeah, and just to expound on that for a second, I think a lot of advertising is changing in general too. And so I think advertisers are trying to, and brands are trying to associate themselves with larger experiences that are maybe not necessarily directly related with the brand. But so they're creating these larger experiences, and it's very much like the Medici's, you know, patrons of the arts in a way, rather than selling, you know, soap with an app or whatever. So I think it is interesting because we're getting not just VR apps or AR things, but you know, installations and projection mapping and other things like all these sort of new formats that they're trying to engage. Engage people with that are memorable, and they're kind of thinking outside the box, which is fun for companies like us because we enjoy that.
The notion of, you know, getting that really high quality content out there, I think, and I'm sure a lot of you have found this too, when people try VR for the first time, if the content is good, then they come away saying they like VR. If the content is a bad experience for them, they come away saying that they don't like virtual reality. It's like they're having trouble distinguishing between the platform and the content itself. So you know, what Jeff's point is really important one. I wonder if, why don't we start with Jeff actually and go down the line, but would you each of you identify content? It can be something that you produced or something that you saw that someone else produced, but, you know, as we look for models of what we should, you know, try to do for high quality content, what are some of the things you've seen out there that, you know, you think really stands out?
Yeah, I mean, that's really on the spot. I think there's a number of great content pieces that have come out this year. I would kind of skirt the issue a little bit because I don't want to disparage anyone's work or, you know, but I will say, you know, if we focus on really great experience, if we focus on high quality capture, if we focus on, you know, great interaction, I think that's where the industry itself is going to win.
Just because I'm more in the what I call Rindy area, and it's more VR mixed with sort of it's an independent VR narrative experience, so I call it Rindy, like indie film. But I like pieces that sort of disrupt thinking or challenge modes of thinking, like Giant. That sort of pull one through a narrative experience into challenging the modes of thought or the political landscape.
I guess, you know, one thing I was talking about before the panel was experiences like what Blackthorn Media is doing, I think, and The Void and things like that, I think we haven't really seen that penetrate yet. So as a business proposition and as an entertainment proposition, I think that's going to be just enormous, and that we're going to start seeing that more and more in malls and movie theaters around the country this year and next, and I think it's going to be huge.
Thanks for the
And I don't-
thanks for the nod.
Yeah.
You know, I think you could answer this question in a number of ways, and what comes to my mind, you know, notwithstanding my own abiding love for the work that we're doing, is, you know, I think about what the original promise of VR was. If you go all the way back to the beginnings of the idea with books like Snow Crash and Neuromancer and stuff like that, and you think about persistent spaces and the social aspect of it all, and are we hitting our marks in this business on that front? And from likewise, from a quality standpoint, your question was about, you know, is the quality of this good? Are we meeting the potential of the industry? No, but I think we are starting to take some steps in that direction. Certainly one of the things we spend a whole lot of time thinking about is, you know, from my standpoint as a creator of VR experiences, I spend a lot of time in VR creating. I say, I'm going to make an environment. I've got back 20 years in the visual effects business. I've got friends I can tap to, help make cool stuff that, looks real. Let's give that toolkit to people who love this medium. And, just like Apple made it easy to make a word processing document look really slick, we say to ourselves, let's make it easy for fans of VR who have a good computer, who have a Vive or an Oculus or whatever the hot shit headset of the day is. Let's make it easy for them to put their own stamp on this and answer this question for themselves, really. I have an idea for fill in the blank. I want to show my friends my idea for this thing. So we talk, for instance, about repurposing some of the assets that we're making in a sort of Lego kind of format to say, hey, we made these great things, let's put them in users' hands, let's start to enable fans to make really beautiful experiences in a really effortless way. I think if we can do that, and I know that's sort of the reason for being for some of the other shops that are out there, it's something that is not our primary goal, but anyway. For me, what I want to see is a very broad swath of people who are in this, who are excited about this field, enabled, empowered to take some really great-looking assets and make their own worlds, perhaps combine them with their own photo libraries. There's some, we could talk for a long time about. We got some secret projects back in the office. We could talk about yada yada yada, but I'm rambling.
For me, obviously, I'm going to be biased and cheerlead, but I will say 360 gets a knock. I think a lot of people dismiss it as real VR, and there's so much 360 content out there. But I would say go look at Felix and Paul's The People's House, which just came out not too long ago, which is a 360 piece that they did on Barack Michelle Obama touring you through the White House as they are about to depart, kind of that. And I think that is a tremendous gold standard for what 360 could be from a narrative perspective, from an experiential perspective. And there's a lot of interesting camera work that was done in there in terms of remote control and time lapse and all these things that you haven't seen in traditional 360. I think on the CG animation side, there's an abundance of good creators on that front. These guys, Penrose, Baobab, VRC does some good stuff. So you can start to see folks starting to merge in the ecosystem. I think the Oculus Story Studio guys put together some great stuff as well, right? So it's out there. You just got to know it, and then encourage newbies as they come into it to go check these pieces of content versus kind of tooling around searching on their own.
Let's just for a second talk about Baobab, because they actually have a really interesting model right now in that their first animated VR short is going in the opposite direction. Now it's being turned into a theatrical feature where usually we see it going in the other direction. So could you talk just a bit about that model?
Yeah, I mean, it was not planned, it just kind of happened. And I think that's what hopefully we'll see more and more of, which is traditional Hollywood, be it actors, producers, directors, other folks that are in the industry wanting to affiliate themselves with VR because it is kind of the new thing. So, they had Ethan Hawke that wanted to voice narrate the invasion for them, okay? Who knew he was interested? They had Elizabeth Banks wanted to be part of their second piece, Asteroids. And then in their third piece, most recently, they got John Legend, they got Diego Luna, and they got Constance Wu. Like, where was this in the business plan? It was none of that, right? It just happened organically because this talent wants to be part of it. They want to executive produce. They want to write an original kind of piece of music for it. They want to voice narrate. And maybe it's because it's animation, slightly different. It's easier for them to kind of step into voice acting and all that kind of stuff than kind of cinematic. But, hopefully, we'll see much more of this going forward. And then I think, hey, in traditional Hollywood, if you're always looking for new IP to kind of go after, if you can option a VR piece, why wouldn't you, since you're optioning books and other kinds and plays and all that other kind of stuff. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of this kind of going both ways.
What was the question again? Being the last in the line, it's kind of...
What is standing out in your mind as great VR right now?
Well, I think that's part of the problem we've kind of all identified is there isn't really there isn't the killer app equivalent in the VR space. If there was, it would be like 100 more headsets being bought. There is no amazing. And this gets into like the chicken and egg scenario. Without a market and without like a lot of headsets, then there's like no way they make your money back. So we continue to see experimentation, and we get to see people dipping their toe in. But ultimately, to great killer content, you need killer budgets, as in like movies, etc. So I mean, there are some reasonable budgets for like some of the short form content and the experimentation that's going on. But again, it still is not like the killer experience. And again, as Michael was saying, there's a big distinction between like a full-on VR, fully animated, requiring like an engine and all the gear experience versus like a 360 piece of content, which is a less of a barrier to entry, and also because of that, the budgets are slightly less, but the experiences can also be very compelling. And I think, and this is part of the reason why we're focusing on 360 content, is that there's going to be a lot more pervasive and accessibility to essentially 360, although it's not necessarily as interactive. You've got this immersion, and you've got a different way of storytelling, but with the number of cameras that were announced at NAB, YouTube and Facebook also supporting it now, I think there's going to be a lot more of that being like people's first gateway into like a VR immersive experience. And as such, I think the budgets and the types of experiences there are definitely going to kind of drive a lot of the audience and the experience of like what VR is before we get into the budgets that are required to create full-on interactive VR experiences.
Right.
It's interesting. There's like some opposing forces happening in the industry too, where, as a content creator and the industry itself, we really want to create original content that exists in the VR space and that can proliferate out and create all these other opportunities, build these worlds where, TV or film or, other entities may come out of that, right? But at the same time, from a consumer focus, you've got this new technology it's already new. We're asking them to do something very new. Put on a headset, click your phone in, experience content in a new way. And in doing that, if you are looking for content to view, you're going to want something that's familiar because the newness of the device itself is already there. Once you add new on top of new, if you then have a bad original content experience, you're like, this whole new thing is too much, right? So those are opposing forces because that means IP that exists. That means taking something like X-Men or taking something like a piece of, like a piece of IP that already exists and putting that into VR. Those two things are coming together in a really interesting way, but we're balancing it right now because at the same time, you don't just want to create demos that are centered in another piece of IP, and people aren't getting real storytelling that way.
I see. I don't know if I totally agree. I mean, I think what live events are going to be huge because for the same reason I keep my cable TV subscription and I want to watch the Warriors, I have to, that's the way to get to it. And if I want to, so I think there's a preciousness to seeing something live that is going to compel people to use this medium and in a more immersive way. But then I think unique content that is made custom doesn't necessarily need to leverage the X-Men or Avengers or any of that sort of thing. Maybe there is some barrier of entry, but I also see a little bit of a curse. Like, I see it very much like the game industry, where some of the most successful titles are not spin-offs of movies, but they're their own things. And then they might re-enter the movie sphere. They're so successful. So I see Job Simulator or things like this as being sort of viral in the way a lot of things on the internet are viral, and they'll speak to the medium in their own way, and they'll come from VR, but they're going to be very much about a completely immersive and high-end experience, whatever they might be, and compel people, like as a killer app, to get into it. And I think it's kind of a dual stream, though. I think you've got 360, and I think you've got interactive, and you've got some attempts at layering them sometimes, but the more premium each of those are, I think one is live 360 with really compelling content and really high fidelity, and the other's really great immersive interactive media. And those things are basically what define VR right now for me. And it isn't necessarily just branded or recognizable that will drive me, as a consumer.
Yeah, I mean more from like a scale perspective. Yeah. When from a grassroots perspective, where you've got original IP that's generating, people bringing people in, but I think also too to try to reach mass and try to get more people to bring in to buy headsets, you have to have a good balance.
From a technology side, what do you feel is needed to really advance things? I.e., do we need higher resolution? Do we need haptics? How important is social?
If I could just jump right in on that. For me, the things that I look for as the sort of what's the ideal 1.0 experience for VR going large. I think of 6 degrees of freedom, and I think of having your hands in the space. For me, that was the moment where I said to myself, "Oh man, this is an experience like nothing else I've seen before." And it was more than So I think for us again and again we come back to this question of what's the minimum that we want to build for, and that comes back to 6 degrees of freedom with your hands in the space as a bare minimum. We look at the work that Google has been doing, for instance, with Tango, and the arrival now of some really good examples of inside-out tracking on headsets, and a couple of things are important here: untethered and less expensive. And then so if I had to predict what we're going to see next year from Google, it's in addition to good inside-out tracking on a Tango-enabled phone. We're going to see devices that can, make sense of the geometry of your hands. So what do we get in that scenario, and why is this exciting? Why is this what we're looking for? You buy a Pixel phone by the end of 2018. It has sensors in it and that enable it to know where that gives you 6 degrees of freedom, and that also gives you your hands back in the space. I think to me that's an inflection point for a mass market adoption, where you say the Daydream experience today is cool, sure. The Gear VR experience today is cool, but boy, it's just an order of magnitude better with head and hands and 6 degrees of freedom. And if your price point for that is $100 to get all of that a year and a half from now, to me, we're really excited about that. What we presume will be arriving in that sort of time frame. Low cost and a really rich experience equals the second half of our business model really kicking into high gear.
The VR theaters are also shouldn't be overlooked, because for a narrative experience, like for if it's not an interactive experience, that's played a huge part for getting our piece out, because we don't have an interactive element to defrost. And just playing our pilot episode, for example, in a lot of the emerging VR theaters has helped us to garner an audience and garner ad agencies to approach us. Also, technologically, like besides the smartphone, I see as being a huge ally in the future, in the next in the next 2 years as in general, for a narrative experience without interaction. I think the theaters are going to be a big deal in different countries internationally.
We had a question, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone?
I think like Facebook Spaces and things like that is going to be the place where that happens because, I don't know about you, but my kids go to a public school. They have textbooks from 1985 that they're using. And so it's hard enough to get premium content out when Heineken is sponsoring it. That we're having trouble just getting content made that's, custom made right now. Oh, I agree, and I would love to do it, but
Okay.
our company is involved with a curricula that the state of California and state of Texas has bought that is getting involved in this right now. It's a little bit under wraps, so I can't say too much to it, but we're using VR and AR. Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, we're using AR and VR, and we're trying to make it in a scalable way, but certainly to cover the amount of material that we need to, it's very difficult to scale, to the extent that commercialization allows.
I think it's a really valuable point, though. I think education and industry is what, look, we're focused on entertainment because of where we are and what we all do, but education and industry is where VR, AR, everything on the R spectrum will really start to integrate into our lives. Right. And whether that's in a factory where you've got a pair of AR glasses and you're able to sort of see what you're supposed to be doing based on that, or you're in a school setting. I really like what Google laid out at I/O a couple weeks ago, where it was really about the spectrum of the Rs. You've got VR, AR, 360 video. It all fits within that sort of spectrum or that curve. And it's just a matter of whether or not, where the content you're creating and the experiences you're creating falls within that. To segment them out, at a certain point in 5 years from now, we may be looking at it and going, can you believe that we talked about it in terms of AR over here and VR over here? And it'll really all just be one level of thing, depending on whether it's blacked out or not. And that will, once those devices are small enough, once they're in everybody's hands, it really will change the game.
Want to talk about business models a little bit. So, Michael Yang, I think we're going to start with you. When does the wider industry really start making money in this area, and what needs to happen in the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the last few years and the next few years, primarily it's hardware manufacturers that are making money, and not much of it. I think there's a select few game titles that have been able to do quite well. And I think if you're pumping out content, I think it's long road to hoe, unfortunately. So, to the extent you can subsidize your content creation by having brands or sponsors or some of the hardware platforms covet what you do and therefore fund it, I think that's your way of staying alive, perfecting your craft, building a brand, building a library, and kind of hanging around the hoop until the market really comes. But I don't think it's in the next couple years. I think there is the often emerging talked about option of doing more location-based content creation, for those venues. I think that is definitely a new angle, a new playbook, a new option. But someone's just got to run through that P&L. We've been studying that ourselves to kind of see how many. A retail ticket, how much can you charge for a ride and experience, a certain amount of minutes, and then where does that money need to go to pay for rent and people and marketing and promotion before the content creator or maybe the IP licensee and all that kind of stuff gets their cut. It becomes thin as well. So I think the extent people can bootstrap, be super frugal, find alternative sources of capital. I just in the non-gaming part of VR, I think that's That's the goal, you know. And in the venture world, they're like, be a cockroach, right? Find a way to kind of survive until, you know, after the nuclear bomb and the whole world has kind of reset. And if you're still around, you're going to win.
It's really interesting to see that Unity just raised that $400 million round. I mean, like, let that sink in, right? Unity, a game development platform, just raised $400 million, right? And based off really the back of the success that they're having in VR. And so that tells you from a long-term perspective, there's a real road here to monetization and profitability and great experiences. And the convergence of all of this is where it gets really interesting, where we're not talking about live and cinematic versus interactive and animated. We're talking about just amazing interactive experiences that involve volumetric and light field and CG and everything coming together as one. But until then, yeah, we are all cockroaches trying to grab onto the next dollar.
It is scary though if you are a narrative. I mean, for those of you out there who are narrative or looking into doing narrative content. I mean, while that's happening at the same time, there are businesses out there that are completely companies that are shutting down their content, their content producers and all of the content, their narrative content branches. So I mean, it's like it's a very scary world right now. For if you're in interactive, it's fine, but like narrative, it's a little bit of a it's like a throwing a lobster into a boiling pot kind of.
And that's that consolidation that I was talking about earlier, where last year it was a proliferate, like I bet you everyone in this room had a VR production company, and everyone out there and everyone it seemed like just everybody had a VR production company. And the reality was there was a lot of money floating around because people were spending, you know, little bits and pieces here and there. So that consolidation gets really hard for independent creators because all of a sudden, if you don't have a body of work, you're not going to get that. Even though the money's going deeper on projects, it's not going as wide. So you don't have those dollars to tap into, and you shut down, or you adapt, or, you know. And so that's what I meant earlier when I said it's the time of like testing VR content creation is sort of over. If you want to get the real funding, you sort of have to know what's going on. That was a couple years ago. By all means, everybody should go out and try and make stuff. That's how you get better. But expecting big funding for it, it's going to be a challenge.
I think there's a couple of things that we look at vis-a-vis, you know, the business model question. And certainly we're looking at a little bit of a desert from a funding standpoint. You know, the VCs obviously are less interested in funding content than technology. And perhaps for obvious reasons. But, you know, on the other hand, we look at what's the ecosystem, you know, the ecosystem that supports VR as a medium. What's that doing? Is the technology developing? Is the experience of VR getting more and more exciting? Or is it drying up? You know, if we saw the Googles and the HTCs and the Valves of the world saying, you know, this VR thing looked promising, but maybe we're not going to do this, then we would be really, you know, kind of quaking in our boots saying, hey, maybe this was a bad bet. But we look at this and say, this technology, the kind of experience that you have, or that's possible, or the things that are on the short-term and long-term horizon just get more and more exciting as time goes by, and there is nothing else like it. So we say this is, you know, this continues to make sense as a North Star for us from a long-term business standpoint. We continue to deeply believe that this medium is only going to be further enriched, and, you know, obviously there's folks making $400 million or, you know, or more dollar bets on various fronts. So anyway, so the North Star is still there from a pure business strategy standpoint. In the shorter term, and apropos the arcade angle that we talk about, that's awfully interesting too. You know, we continue to see there's some seismic shifts that have been going on in the real estate business in malls, for instance. So the economics of, hey, I'm gonna oh, you know, what am I as an owner of a mall really excited about the prospects for the future right now? No, I'm freaking out, and I'm looking for ways to get people back in. Right. And it sure seems like VR is one of those things that's maybe got the power to draw people away from their 70-inch TVs at home to get out and try something new. So anyway, there's other, I think, very compelling arguments to say the kinds of market forces that are looking at VR as a way of enriching already existing spaces is keeping us pretty active in the field right now as well.
A question on the arcades and location-based. In the case of stereoscopic 3D in movie theaters, the glasses are either one use and then they're disposable, or they have the industrial washing machines where they clean them between uses. Now, for things like this that we're talking about, where they're going to be passed from person to person, has anyone seen a viable model for how to clean them? I'm curious.
They're so gnarly.
Yeah.
There's an industrialized business opportunity right there. I mean, look, there's the ninja mask thing. I don't know, I think that's what you were just referencing, where it's like a little thing that you put on and then you put the headset on over that. I mean,
It's like the golf tee. I think it's just waiting to be discussed. Like somebody's waiting to discover that.
It's the bowling shoe industry.
It is. It is people power. I mean, in Amsterdam, virtual reality cinema is probably one of the premier kind of destinations where they're just running people through 30-minute kind of primarily 360 packs of content that are thematic, and you buy, a ticket, you sit for 30 minutes, and then, you could buy another one or you move on, right? But it is put you in a chair, you might swivel a little bit, do your thing, then you're out. Go hang out by the bar, buy some food, drinks, and then they'll clean, they'll bring in the next crew, but it's like a movie, right? So there's nothing kind of high tech about it. It's just, are you willing to hire people at a low enough wage that it still works, math-wise,
Greg Ciaccio had a question, yes.
I think it would help. It'll help a little bit. I don't think it's. The guys at Unity are great. And, we have a great relationship with them, and we love what they do. But I don't see that myself. I mean, maybe some of the other guys can chime in here. But I don't see that as a revolutionary, great democratizer. I see it as another nice addition to a tool set that's already awfully robust, but that perhaps has a steep learning curve for folks who wouldn't normally be opening Unity or Unreal.
I think it's interesting, though. I mean, when you think about any sort of media, anybody can pick up a camera and go make a video, but whether or not it's going to be good is based on the level of experience they have, not necessarily the tools themselves. And I think that's true when it comes to coding for the web, or it comes to coding for a game, or it comes to sort of anything that requires some diligence in learning the craft, whether it's learning a programming language or learning f-stops or whatever it is. So I think that's just inherent. I think that there will be tools created that allow you to create really easy experiences or nested content types and that sort of a thing. And that's all coming. We have to remember we're at the very, very, very beginning. Even though for all of us in the room, at least for me, and I know everybody on the panel, it feels like we've been in this VR world forever. The reality is it's very much at the beginning. And so there are going to be amazing playful tools that a kid can jump into a VR space and create a world with. And then there's going to be the professional side that is creating really compelling experiences, just like film, just like any media.
So just like Minecraft democratized a certain kind of they made billions of dollars on, hey, what if we made Lego in this world and gave it to everybody? We think about, when I was yakking about our, hey, let's make it easy for folks to build their own experiences in VR that they can share with their friends. I think that sort of toolkit is the answer to your question. Again, it depends on the kind of media you're talking about. If you're talking about a video live kind of experience, that's a very different sort of tool set. If you're talking about, hey, I have an idea for a virtual space that I want to invite my friends to where we can meet online, something like that that can be built in a way that doesn't require gigantic technical expertise.
Yeah, you're also seeing tools like Quill and Medium and things like that, where you can export media from that and create works of art in the medium. And so you're really looking at it as a medium rather than as just a singular experience, and so I think you're going to start seeing those things grow like Photoshop or Maya or whatever, like they become authoring tools.
Just like the mouse back in 1984, change the way we all use computers. You know, we already have the mice of the VR revolution, and they're attached to our wrists. They just need to be enabled, and that's coming. There's some awfully interesting work all over the map being done in that field right now. It's a fun field as well, because if you have an idea and a little bit of technical acumen, you can say, hey, I have an idea for a way to interact with things in 3D, and you make it and you're showing your friends a day later. Anyway, ask that question again next year. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's sort of a tangent, but I was watching a video from I think it was the Beijing Film Academy, and they were using a VR camera, or they were using a camera in VR space to do previs on this really, really complex film scene. And right there, they were able to kind of map out every aspect of that scene and save quite a bit of money and time when they went to actually go shoot it. Now, that was for film. They were using VR as a tool for film production. Mm-hmm. But when you think about what that can become when turned back around on itself, and all of a sudden you're creating that scene in real time and saving, and I mean, it does get really interesting.
And,
really
now think in terms of combining things like intelligent agents,
right?
Clever bits of code that people write and put on an asset store, and all of it.
Yeah, well, and if you look at the AI, I forget who did it, but it was like the AI walking polygon test, where if as a human who is trying to direct this 3D character through space, a CGI character through space, there's a particular way that that character will move, and they've developed somebody has to look this up, but someone's developed an AI that can actually mimic that and create movement that feels like human movement rather than that stilted movement that you think of with computerized motion. So that starts to blow the doors wide open.
Really sophisticated virtual actors are coming.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to pose one last question. So from here, everyone in this room is a stakeholder in this new area. What has to happen in virtual reality and augmented reality in the coming years? Is there a call to action in order to continue to grow this area?
I think you said it in a really interesting way, which is if you're in this content type, if emerging media and VR AR is part of your strategy, identifying that as a North Star and seeing it and realizing that there is a long game here, that right now there will be peaks and valleys. Last year there was a lot of explosion about VR. This year there's a lot of hype around AR, primarily because the headsets aren't out yet. There will always be troughs. And then it's coming back out of that where the real business models happen, where real sustained growth can happen. So really kind of looking at that North Star and going, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to commit to making, whether it's great content, great hardware, great tools, and staying on track, I think is the biggest, like staying focused will be the biggest thing.
Peter, what are you saying?
Go ahead.
Also, in addition to that, in addition to the true playing off of the true North Stars, is also recognizing what is true North, and because it's tough to figure out, and that comes, I think, with staying in it, just buckling down and staying in the VR, in the VR AR world, because there is so much vacillation. Well, at least sometimes there's a lot of vacillation of, is this here to stay? Is it not here to stay? Sometimes if you're on the artistic end, and just like I've been trying to get Defrost out for 2.5 years, so just saying what is the reality of the world right now in which we're playing in, and so figuring out like what is true north, how do we sell the project, who are the players, and just keep coming back.
We have to remember that film, TV, audio recordings, all of these things that we take for granted now were emerging media at their time. Right? So when theaters were created, when the first TV was put into a home, people were asking the question, will this be a thing? Is there a future in this? And you have to sort of look at those market factors and say, yes, there is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the thoughts that come to mind is, when he was talking about the 3 Rs at Google, they are very different, and they're all completely legitimate and growing in their own ways, but they're differentiating at the same time. And and becoming more and more in and of themselves. And so I think, you know, I try not to place a value judgment on it, but I have different frustrations with each. And, you know, right now, like, there's so much hype about augmented reality, and I see that as a much longer road right now for something. And maybe I'm just judging it too much on immersion, the way I would judge 360 and VR. I think it's going to make a big splash in enterprise and academic spaces, and not quite be the same in entertainment. And people are equating all three of them right now like they're almost the same thing, and I don't quite understand it. Because, you know, I mean, the HoloLens, I was involved in, you know, incubating that as an external lab with Microsoft, and it's got a very narrow field of view. It's a very expensive piece of equipment, and just as a consumer, that's how I usually think of things. You know, am I going to buy this device for my house and use it? And right now, I'm much more inclined to watch 360 video content because that's super easy on my phone, or go play games with a Vive or an Oculus. And that, right now, the barrier of entry for AR is very high for something that I would use all the time. So I think it's a longer road. I think it's just as legitimate, and maybe we'll have be more monetizable in the long run. Who knows? But it's got to, you know, right now we're kind of at a stage with VR where I can make a business model around it and hang around the hoop, as he was saying.
So, you know what, actually, we do have to wrap up now because we have another session coming in after this, and I've been asked to close on time. So I think the panelists will be around for a few minutes if you want to have individual conversations, but please join me in thanking our speakers.